juice from it.
All right, you get all the juice out of it. You put it in a vat, and then you, of course, build a fire under it, and you begin to work it. And eventually, after I don't know how many hours that might be,
Wow.
it takes a while. You stir it, you keep boiling it down, and eventually you get molasses. Now, I said all that to say this. Tonight, we're going to get a sermon up. Kind of give you the process of the way I do it. Been thinking about this sermon. Matthew chapter 5 is what I would be preaching on next. But Matthew chapter 5, verse, let me get over there. Verse 27. Matthew chapter 5, 27. A lot of you just quoted probably. But we are going to read it if I can ever get this iPad to work here. Actually, it's me. Jesus said, "Ye have heard that it was said of them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her, hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." And then he goes on. "And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell." I have a firm opinion that those verses are all of one section. What I'm about to say, I need to think about, I guess, but sexuality is one of the, I was going to say the most, and I don't know that I can say that. Probably hunger and thirst would be above that, obviously. But it's one of the most, it's one of the strongest things the human beings deal with. And this is kind of the introduction, then I'm going to take a place you've never thought of in a moment. But how many of you, you don't have to raise your hand. I suppose every adult here have known of others, other people, who've committed adultery. You've known people who fornicated. Fornication comes from a Greek word which is the broad sexual sin. Okay? We all know of people who have committed sexual sins. That may have been something in our life at one time where we have committed a sexual sin. We read about some of the great characters of the Bible, such as David, a man who had such faith and conviction that he could kill a lion and a bear. A man of such conviction that he was faced Goliath. And yet a man that when he looks upon a woman, he lusts after her. And when he finds out, he inquires, she's married, he continues and commits adultery, and then tries to cover it up in a horrendous fashion, and ultimately has her husband murdered. How tragic that is. But surely we can all understand the strong temptation of sexual sins. And Jesus deals with this in a unique way. He said, "You have heard of old time the people who said, Thou shalt not commit adultery." All right, fine. But where does it start?
The heart.
In the heart, in the mind. And I think in this audience we all understand when Jesus says, "Whosoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." It goes without saying, he's not talking about this pump in our chest as pumping blood. No, as been mentioned many, many times, it's the mind. Here's where this begins. And Jesus says, if we correct that, we won't have to worry about the physical act. It's in the mind. Now, stop here, and here's where we start making molasses. But I assure you, at least in my feeble mind, it brings so much more to the equation when we understand this. Go back to the book of Genesis with me. Genesis chapter, we'll start with chapter 8. Genesis chapter 8. And if you know the context, you'll know that the flood, I cannot use this iPad tonight. Genesis chapter 8, the flood has already occurred. Remember how God had Noah to bring in the different animals. Two of seventh pair of the queen, if my memory serves me correct, into the ark. After the ark, okay, look what happens here. Let me find where I want to start reading again. Verse 15, Genesis 8, verse 15. Again, be patient with me. As I said, I'm not prepared. And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife, and thy sons wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl, and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply upon the earth. Okay. So after the flood, there's barren of every living thing that breathes there. And he tells Noah, bring these animals forth and let them breed abundantly. Now, I am not a biologist, but look at how most mammals, at least that we are familiar with. For instance, have you noticed driving around, if you travel any at all right now, this time of year, you see dead deer on the road? More than any other time of the year? The answer is yes. Why is that? No, not food right now. It's what we call the rut. It's the breeding period of white-tailed deer. I used to hunt a lot, too much. Don't hunt anymore. However, let's say in about late August, 1st September, the days begin to get shorter. The pituitary gland of the bucks, the males, causes the blood flow to stop growing, stop going to the antlers, and the antlers become harder. At that time, they are being prepared by nature, God, to enter into this breeding season. The does, often the oldest does being the female deer, if you're not familiar with the terminology, things will begin to change. Some of them will be going into estrus, if I'm saying all this correctly. And estrus simply means it's God's way of now she is ready to breed. Okay? The peak of the rut is in November. Well, this takes her, once she begins to go into this cycle, the white-tailed buck now is ready to breed. He can detect that, and he's following her. He's chasing her, waiting for the time that she will stand, okay, where the physical act occurs. And that's why, there's a lot of deer being run over on highways and stuff like that. It's crazy season for them, I guess you would say. All right. Then when the peak of the rut occurs, these bucks are fighting to determine who's going to be the pecking order, if you want to call it that. Breedings occur. Actually, we're on the back side of the rut now. The does have been bred will all have their does gestation period for the white-tailed deer is about 6 months, which if you've noticed, late June, July, we start seeing these little spotted fellas running everywhere, and they're so pretty. That's the way God created. The doe doesn't say, I'm just not going to have any fun this year. I don't want to be tired of that mess. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not, count me out. I'm not going to do it. Does she have that choice? No. No, this is just something that happens. It's biology. There's no thought process to it. When she is in full estrus, she stands, there is this act that occurs, it is reproduction. Cattle, same way. Somewhat different though. Instead of having a particular time, a heifer, a cow that has a calf that's a female, it's called a heifer before she breeds. This heifer, she grows, and when she reaches a certain point of maturity, then she's going to reach this state of estrus, and she's going to stand while a bull carries out this act. That's God's nature. I like it. I like animal breeding. Okay? That's the way God created it. Once more, the heifer doesn't say, I'm going to have a calf. I'm just not going to do it. Nor does the bull say, say, you looked at her to Charlotte, said, I am not messing with that cow. She's getting out all the time. She causes so much problems. I'm not messing with her. I'm going down to the pond to cool off. That's not the way it works. When that cow is ready, she stands, the bull comes and breathes. No other time does that bull bother her, so to speak. Only when this act that God has created for procreation, the sole reason of this physical act is procreation. Same with dogs and cats and so on. You get the idea. We're all familiar with it. Now, I bring that up for this. This is how God designed it for the animal kingdom. For the sole purpose of procreation. There is no thought process to it. There is no relationship to it. Whenever, this buck breeds this doe, or this bull, this calf, or this, cat, dog, whatever, once the act has occurred, they no longer associate. How long is this fawn attached to the mother? Any idea? Typically 5-6 months. By October, November, the fawn can live on its own. My point, it's all a very brief time period. Again, I want to stress this, no relationship. No, it's all biology, no thought process. And that's the way God created the animal kingdom. Now, I'm not asking you to speak for God. I've not thought a lot about this personally, and I'm not saying I can't either. I can have ideas. But why do you think God didn't create humans that way? To me, this is another fact. The deeper you get into stuff like this, is the more and more and more I believe that evolution is nonsense. Time and chance don't count at all. If we are a byproduct of time and chance, and all this is evolutionary process from one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing, here I am. Why aren't we governed by the same instincts?
We were made in the image of God.
Bingo. We're made differently. And it comes with, in this very basic concept of reproduction, I think it shows so profoundly that we are different. Jesus says, whosoever looketh upon a woman with the purpose of lust, that's the intent, that's the reason you're looking upon this person, and you lust in your heart, you've already committed the act. In the heart, not in a physical, literal act. In other words, if your wife looks upon some handsome man, and if she were indeed to look upon him with that purpose, that doesn't mean I'm divorcing you tomorrow. No, we're talking about the physical act here. But Jesus says that's where you need to stop this. The thought process. And that's something that animals in their reproduction doesn't come into play at all. If you've ever hunted any, it would be hard to kill. It would be hard to have a turkey come to you and kill a male gobbler. But during the breeding season is when you can do that, because you imitate a hen. If you're hunting, you're in a blind, you've got camo on or whatever, you propped up, and whenever this gobbler, he wants to find a hen, it's the mating season, you can, and I've done this, and it's the most exciting kind of hunting I think there is, but you can imitate this hen, and he'll come look, where's she at? It's the only time of year you can do that. Many mature bucks are nocturnal, meaning they're only out at night mainly. You seldom ever see them in the day. But the only time you do see them during the day is when they're following a doe, or they're looking for a doe. So, it changes their whole, everything about them has changed because of this desire to breed. God brought that into them. We are not like that. God says it's we control this act of reproduction. Okay? Now, again, I'm not prepared, as you may have already understood. But, why do you think, and the thought question,
we're supposed to.
Sure. Well said, Catherine,
Do
we're
you,
supposed
do
to have
you
a
think
mind.
they know?
That's true, but think deeper.
We have a soul.
I'm sorry?
We have a soul.
So,
All right, we have a soul, all that's right. You give me, everybody take correct answers. Now, do you think other things?
and then we're the only one that can, I mean, we have a choice. And,
Sure.
and we should know right from wrong, so you know that animals don't, I mean, you know, they don't have a mind like that, they don't,
No, I agree. And what animals do, is that wrong?
no,
No,
that's
not at
their
all.
nature.
That's nature, that's the way God created them to reproduce. Here's what I'm trying to get, here's some things that I've thought of. Why did God create man that way? Because mankind have relationships. The purpose, not the sole purpose, but one of the purposes of having sexuality among human beings is procreation. When a child is born, we see the effects so much in our society. So much in our society, when we see a child is born, left to the mother alone to raise, when that happens, it almost always brings about change with the mother and the child. I'll give you statistics. That's statistic. I can't say it. And everyone in this audience is white, Caucasian. I am not a racist. I want to bring forth a statistic, though, and I'll tell you why I think it's true, or why I believe it to be true. Blacks make up 13% of America. According to the FBI files, and you can go Google this or look this up yourself, and I forget the exact statistics. Like I said, this is preparation for sermon, even though I wouldn't bring this out in the sermon. But over 50%, over half of all murderers are African American. Make up 13% of the population. Over 50% of all murders committed by blacks, mostly black men. Now, where do you think most of these murders occur? In the inner cities. If you look up Chicago, so much of it is gang related. They have multiple murders typically for the weekend. Multiple ones. Now here's what I'm trying to get at. So often we see, and this is statistical, you can read this and study this, so many, out of people who are not married, and I'm talking about particularly in the black culture there, men get women pregnant, they're not dealing with home, and the woman is left to raise this child of her own without proper supervision, often without religious instruction. You know, the child, I'm sorry, turns into a heathen. And we see so much of that in these inner cities. And yes, they are running that statistic out of the roof. A lot of it's black on black, meaning blacks killing other blacks. I'm not saying they're killing white people. You know, the majority of those the murders that are occurring are them killing other blacks in the inner cities. And often it is because of the family unit is not there. God knew. I mean, how long is a child with the parents typically?
It's because they don't know anything else to do. I don't even, they don't even read it. They said,
Well, it's not they, and I use black as an illustration because of the inner city, because the lack of the family unit is not there. And that's what I'm trying to get at.
But they're not raised with morals
they,
either,
no,
though.
they're not,
Do what?
They're not raised in a moral family
That's
like
correct.
with others.
atmosphere.
And that's not innate. By innate, I mean, it's not that I'm born as a human. I already know right from wrong in every respect. I know I've got to believe in God of heaven and earth that created all. I know there's a heaven and a hell. I know that I have to treat others with respect. And we're not born that way. We are taught that. And that's my point that I'm trying to make. And that's the reason I use the statistics among the black murders. Because so often, and again, mostly in the inner cities, it's the home life that's been destroyed.
Well, they're in a lot of the states that have, they take, criminals and
Well,
state
the reason, Catherine, I said the inner cities, if you will look at Chicago, for instance, especially, and you look at the black population within the larger inner cities, is like Memphis, for instance, and again, Chicago and other places, it is large, and in often those cities, it's a lack of homes. And what I'm trying to get you to see is, and I use that as an illustration, which perhaps is bad, I don't know, it's facts, but I use that illustration to point out that when it's not in a home relation, a home environment, when sex happens without the couple, husband and wife, without the home being as strong as it ought to be, it simply brings problems. Children are brought up without this moral code that all of us had the good fortune. I didn't choose my parents. I thank God for them. That I had a father and a mother who had morals, who slapped my hand when I was wrong and said, no, I can't have that attitude. What do you mean I can't talk back to you? I mean, you get the idea.
We were fortunate being under our generation.
Yes. But you see, it was in God's plan that the animal kingdom, it's this way. You don't even have to know this person. I know it's just an act. It's a physical act that brings about the further propagation of that race being deer or dog, cat, whatever. Animals, yes. Men, mankind, no. It happens with thought. A woman can say no. I'm not going to have a child if she doesn't want to. Couples are not governed by this instinct that all of a sudden it's got to happen now. No, God said you can control this. It is the mind, it is the heart. And again, sex outside the marriage, 1 Corinthians 6:18, Paul says, flee fornication. Every sin that a man does without the body, he that commits fornication sins against his own body. That's pretty well the quote there, Jacob. 1 Corinthians 6:18. So, again, God made mankind different. And Jesus is here saying, you've heard the act is wrong. Well, that's true. But it starts here. It starts in the mind. And then we read concerning the act of sexuality. Did God want Adam and Eve, as well as Noah and his family, to reproduce after the flood? The answer is yes. I read to you what God had said concerning the animal kingdom, but look at what he said concerning Adam and Eve. Genesis chapter 9, verse 1. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Well, who was on that ark? Who was on the ark?
Noah, his wife,
All right, couple. Who else?
his sons, 3 sons, and their wives.
And their wives. They were couples.
So you have to be taught, and a lot of people's not taught from
Well, I
the
agree.
beginning. And that's why it's good to be taught and placed and preached about too.
I think so. So as he told them to reproduce here, the husbands, and again, they were husbands and wives, they were couples that were married in these relationships. And in these relationships, he said, be fruitful and multiply. I've said many times, and I continue to say, and those of you who have children, I think you would understand as well. When you had children, did it bring a growth in your mind, or I don't know if that's the right word to use, but did you not understand love better when you had a child? You know, you go down to the nursing home, and so often you'll see an older lady there, maybe mentally she has issues, and she's holding a little baby. By a baby, I mean a doll, made of plastic or whatever. Why is that? It's an instinct of love.
Because they bring a lot of joy to you.
Absolutely.
That they do.
You know, David said in the Psalms, happy is the man that had his quiver full of them. And he was using arrows symbolic of children. And I think personally, my personal opinion, seen the difference between how God decided he would replenish the earth in the animal kingdom, impersonal, biology, it's just the act. But with humans, made in his image, first for Genesis 1:27, it's very different. It has to do with the mind process. And he created sex for marriage. Because that is the realm he wanted children to be brought into. Knowing it would be the proper environment to raise a child. And he tells us a great deal about this. Matter of fact, it's one reason, the only reason, but sexual desires, which are not wrong, we're created in the image of God. He created us as human beings to have desire, but those were to be captured or fulfilled, rather, in marriage. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I think it's chapter 7, again, this is my research here, but in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, what did he say about the father who had a child or a widow or whatever that was unmarried? And that's a very, very big question. But he said, it is better for them to marry than to burn. What do you mean by that? What's the context of burn?
New King James actually adds after burn is better to marry than to burn with passion.
Yeah.
So living under sex outside the marriage, it's better to be, if you have that desire, it's better to be in a married relationship than to burn and suffer for doing the sexual act outside of marriage. I think in Hebrews 13:4, marriage is honorable among all,
Better than the
undefiled, the fornicators and adulterers, God will judge.
And the passage in context in 1 Corinthians 7:36 and following, the New King James brings it out better. Paul was saying, given the current distress, you think about the problems that Paul saw from the persecutions of Judaism, and maybe even some of the things he knew was going to happen, the destruction of Jerusalem. So much was happening. Rome would soon be raising its ugly head. We see in the book of Revelation. Paul himself and Saul of Tarsus said he was hailing men and women off to prison, meaning he was basically dragging them off to prison. And he was saying that it's probably good for this present time to remain single, as he was. And then he goes on to say, but if they have that passion concerning a couple, it's only natural as a young man, a young woman, maybe they begin to date in their teens and in their early 20s or whatever, to be attracted to one another. And yes, sexuality is part of such. And Paul is saying, rather than having burn and passion, let them marry. Right, James?
I look at it, it's all in God's time. For example, if you can recall Abraham with the promise, he met his own timing when he got Ishmael. It was Isaac who was the promise. If you notice that Ishmael and Isaac, because of that, was butting heads or fighting. Another thought was Lot and his daughters. That's where we got the Ammonites and the Moabites. Because of Lot and his daughter, and then we have the Ammonites and the Moabites. What are they doing? They're butting heads again with God's people. Because it came out of God's timing instead of into God's timing. So
talking about in a sexual manner is what he had reference to. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication. Same thing that I brought up earlier with 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And yes, I know this has been a very ramble class period. It's making classes. We're boiling it down. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Now, it didn't say anything about friends with benefits. You ever heard that phrase? What's it mean? It's an adult class. What's it mean?
Friends that get together just to hang out and have sex.
Yeah. No ties, no relationship. It's just what it is. That's not what he said. Let every woman have her own husband. Let every husband have his own wife. It is relationship. It is marriage. Why? Well, in case children come from this, it's going to be in the right, the right place here. He goes on to say, verse 3, let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. You have that. You have the New King James, Jacob, don't you? Could you read that verse?
Which one, verse 3?
Yes.
Let the husband render to his wife the affection due her, and likewise also the wife to her husband.
Let me look that up real quick, because my past studies, I'm almost positive of. Yeah, the word due, D-U-E. Let me read to you if there's definition. To owe money, to be in debt